Another grim warning from the UN that there's no credible way of limiting the rise in global warming. We have a special report from a region of the Arctic Circle which is warming more quickly than any other place on Earth, with devastating effects.
And all wildlife here in Svalbard is having to adapt to this hotter world.
The Prime Minister, seen here at last year's COP26 climate summit in Glasgow, has decided not to attend this year's summit in Egypt, drawing heavy criticism.
Our Prime Minister will be missing in action, and what he obviously fails to understand is that tackling the climate crisis is also the way to lower energy bills, create jobs and give us energy security.
We'll have more on the latest warnings from the UN and evidence of the damage that's being done in the Arctic. Also, good evening. There's been another grim warning from the UN that there's no credible way of limiting the rise in global warming. A new report talks of woefully inadequate action by the world's governments to keep the rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, as leaders prepare to gather for COP27, that is the global climate conference taking place this year in Egypt, the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has decided not to attend. Downing Street says he has other pressing domestic commitments, including the autumn budget. But the decision has been heavily criticised by political opponents and by environmental campaigners. In a moment, we'll have a special report on the environmental damage being done in the Arctic Circle. But first, our climate editor, Justin Rowlatt, has the latest.
Catastrophic floods in Nigeria have driven more than 1 million people from their homes this month. An example of the kind of extreme weather science says will become more common as our climate changes. And we had a second day of dire warnings from the United Nations, underscoring just how urgent the threat is. The world is on track for a rise of 2.8 degrees this century, with devastating consequences for millions of people, the report said. Yesterday, UN Chief Antonio Guterres told the BBC he wanted Rishi Sunak to attend.
The presence of the new British Prime Minister would be very encouraging for all of us.
Hosts of the Glasgow summit last year, the UK formally hands over responsibility for the UN climate talks in Egypt. But today we learned the Prime Minister will not be going. Number 10 says he's too busy with other commitments, but his predecessor, Liz Truss, was planning to attend. Egypt says more than 90 world leaders, including US President Joe Biden, will be there.
We were the hosts of the last climate summit, and now our Prime Minister will be missing in action. And what he obviously fails to understand is that tackling the climate crisis is also the way to lower energy bills, create jobs and give us energy security.
It's easy to forget the threat global warming presents when the weather's like this. Tourists were enjoying a balmy autumn on the French Riviera today, but the blistering summer heat in Europe and around the world hit harvests of key crops. It's another reason we're paying so much for food at the moment, and another reason we should worry about our changing climate. Well, Hugh, there's no question the UN will be very disappointed. The British Prime Minister will not be attending the climate conference in Egypt. Only yesterday, the UN chief was telling me how important it is that world leaders go to these conferences. They galvanise the process, he said, encouraging people to reach ambitious agreements. And you'll remember, Hugh, Liz Truss advised King Charles not to go. So that leaves Alok Sharma, who headed the Glasgow summit, leading the UK at this UN climate summit in Egypt.
Justin, many thanks again. Justin Rowlatt, our climate editor there in New York. Well, we'll stay with this story because one place where the impact of climate change is increasingly evident is Svalbard, and that's in the Arctic Circle. The Norwegian islands are warming more quickly than any other place on Earth. Our Europe correspondent Nick Beak has travelled there for this special report.
Venture deep into the Arctic Circle and you find Svalbard. There's no place quite like it. And here, a struggle for survival. Climate change is on fast forward. Polar explorer Hilda Farmström wants to show us how her world is disappearing. Soon, an incredible sight, but one framed with sadness.
To survive as a polar bear now, I think you have to be super good at hunting, because the main source of food, the seals, they are diminishing, and the ice that both the seal and the polar bears are dependent on are diminishing. It's getting less and less ice.
This Norwegian archipelago is warming 6 times faster than the global average. There's much less ice here to reflect heat and more exposed ocean to absorb it.
These beluga whales, they're swimming in water that's much hotter than it used to be. And all wildlife here in Svalbard is having to adapt to this hotter world. You can hear them now. It's hotter in the water and it's hotter in the air too.
Melting here raises sea levels and affects weather patterns across the globe. In what is the northernmost settlement in the world, it's life on the edge. Houses are being moved and rebuilt, new barriers installed to stop more avalanches triggered by the thawing ground.
Wherever I look around us, I see change.
And leading polar scientist Kim Holloman tells us the war in Ukraine is now undermining the effort to understand climate change.
The official exchange with Russian institutions is not possible at this time. Half of the Arctic is Russian coastline. And if we are unable to share knowledge and data, it will hamper our ability to understand what is happening. We need each other in order to do good science.
Svalbard attracts tens of thousands of visitors every year, putting further strain on this fragile environment. But the authorities claim they're moving towards renewable energy.
Now we are in one of the 2 production sites we have here in mine number 7. We are 8 kilometers in the mine.
This is Svalbard and Norway's last coal mine, which we're told is due to close.
It makes me sad. It was a mining town and now it's coming to an end. It's more and more of a tourist town.
But just a fortnight after our visit, the state-owned company announces it's delaying the closure. Why? It says Europe's energy crisis now makes the mine a more profitable operation. If they can't give up fossil fuels in the fastest warming place on Earth, what hope for the rest? The UN says we face a climate emergency. The alarm is sounding. We ignore it at our peril. Nick Beak, BBC News, in the Arctic Circle.